August 8th, 1969. The Los Angeles air, thick and warm like honey, was filled with serenity. It was a golden time, the era of the summer of love, when it seemed the world was about to dissolve into an ocean of universal brotherhood, and that the music of the Beatles and the California sun could heal any wound. In the very heart of this paradise, nestled in the hills of Beverly Hills at 150 Cielo Drive, life was idyllic. The house, like a fairy tale castle, was enveloped in greenery, and its owner was the fairy of this story. Her name was Sharon Tate. She was a 26-year-old actress whose beauty was so perfect it seemed otherworldly. She was the wife of the brilliant and controversial director Roman Polanski, a style icon, the embodiment of the era. And on this evening, she was particularly beautiful. 9 months pregnant, she glowed from within, filled with a quiet, peaceful happiness. Her husband was in London finishing work on a film, and she eagerly awaited his return so they could welcome their first child, a boy they had already decided to name Paul. The evening was lazy and calm. Earlier in the day, her sisters had wanted to visit, but Sharon, tired from the heat and the late stage of her pregnancy, asked them not to come, promising to call them later. In the evening, she and 3 close friends, famous hairstylist Jay Sebring, coffee heiress Abigail Folger, and her partner, Polish screenwriter Wojciech Frykowski, dined at her favorite Mexican restaurant, El Coyote. They returned home around 10:30 that night. Nothing foretold the coming disaster. There was only the sound of crickets and the sight of the distant lights of Los Angeles. A soft light glowed from within the house, and quiet music played. Sharon changed into a bikini and a light robe. Her friends talked and laughed. It was the last, serene frame in a movie about a beautiful and happy life. The last evening in paradise. But beyond this small haven, in the sweltering California night, darkness was already stirring. 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, sent by a self-proclaimed messiah named Charles Manson, were already making their way up the winding road of Cielo Drive, ready to turn this fairy tale into a bloody nightmare and bring the age of innocence to a violent, permanent end. Sharon Tate was born to be a star. It was as if nature itself, in creating her, had decided to reveal to the world an ideal of beauty, purity, and light. She was born on January 24th, 1943, in Dallas, Texas, to the family of U.S. Army Colonel Paul Tate. From infancy, her beauty was so obvious, so dazzling, that it almost became her profession. At just 6 months old, she won her first beauty pageant, earning the title Miss Tiny Tot of Dallas. This was only the beginning. Throughout her short life, she would collect crowns and titles as if they were not awards, but simply confirmation of what was already clear to everyone. She was perfection. But behind this radiant facade, this doll-like appearance, hid a surprisingly shy, vulnerable, and lonely soul. This was the first, deepest emotional hook of her character. Due to her father's military career, the family moved constantly. By the age of 16, she had lived in 6 different cities. The constant changing of schools, the new faces, and the inability to form true friendships made her withdrawn and timid. Her beauty was not a gift, but a wall that separated her from others. Boys were afraid to approach her. Girls were envious. She was like a precious exhibit in a museum, admired by all from a distance, but one that nobody dared to touch. Everything changed when her father was transferred to Italy. Here, under the warm European sun, in an atmosphere of eternal celebration and carefree living, the icy shell of her loneliness began to melt. She finally found friends among the students at the American school in Verona, and it was here, in Italy, that fate made its first move. One day, she and her friends found themselves on a film set as extras. Her otherworldly beauty was immediately noticed. Actor Richard Beymer, struck by how photogenic she was, spent hours convincing her that her place was not in the background, but in the spotlight, and that she was destined to become a great actress. He was, in essence, the first person who saw her as more than just a beautiful doll, but a future star. This was the second, decisive hook. Beymer's words fell on fertile ground. The girl who had dreamed of becoming a psychiatrist suddenly realized her true calling was to shine. She began to take action. She auditioned for roles, appeared in commercials, and had small parts in television shows. Her path was not always easy. Producers saw her merely as a striking blonde, perfect for girl in a bikini roles. But she was smarter and had more depth than she seemed. She worked hard on her craft, taking acting lessons and dreaming of serious, dramatic roles. Her persistence paid off. Producer Martin Ransohoff saw her potential and signed her to a 7-year contract. He became her Pygmalion. He invested money in her, found roles for her, and molded her into a star. And she lived up to his expectations. Her role in the mystical comedy Eye of the Devil, where she played an enigmatic witch, showed that she could be more than just beautiful. She could be mysterious and intriguing. Her role in the cult classic Valley of the Dolls earned her a Golden Globe nomination and cemented her status as one of Hollywood's most promising young actresses. She was on the verge of great fame. Critics praised her talent, and directors lined up to cast her in their films. It seemed a brilliant future awaited her. She was Hollywood's golden girl, a symbol of a new era, a flower child, the embodiment of love, light, and hope. But the brighter she shone, the thicker the darkness gathered on the horizon, ready to consume her. Fate brought them together on the set of the film The Fearless Vampire Killers in 1967. She was a rising star, the protege of an influential producer, a young woman whose beauty was her main, and at that time, only asset. He was Roman Polanski, a 34-year-old director already recognized as a genius in Europe, but still a dark horse in Hollywood. He was a child who had survived the Krakow ghetto, a prodigy, a provocateur, and a troublemaker. Their meeting was a collision of two different worlds, two opposing energies. And this collision gave rise to one of the most beautiful and tragic love stories of the 20th century. At first, Polanski was not impressed. He was looking for a red-haired beauty for the role, not a typical California blonde. He thought little of Tate's acting talent, later admitting that some scenes with her required as many as 70 takes. But there was something else about her, an inner purity, a kindness, a softness that was disarming. Sharon and Roman didn't get along right away, her sister Deborah later wrote. During their first date, Polanski barely spoke to her, and during the second, he attacked her while wearing a Frankenstein mask. This was his signature style, a mix of childish spontaneity and devilish temptation. And Sharon, who had spent her life around proper, predictable men, was captivated. This was the first emotional hook, the attraction to her complete opposite, to a man from a different, darker, yet alluring world. Without hesitation, she ended her relationship with her then-boyfriend, the famous Hollywood hairstylist Jay Sebring, and moved into Polanski's London apartment. Their romance developed rapidly in the public eye. They became the most fashionable, most talked-about couple in London and then in Hollywood. They were called the Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford of their time. They were young, talented, madly in love, and completely free. On January 20th, 1968, they were married in London in a ceremony that became the quintessence of the swinging 60s style. She wore a revolutionary short, ivory-colored dress with flowers in her hair. He wore an old-fashioned Edwardian suit. They were like characters from a fairy tale that was about to end with, and they lived happily ever after. But their marriage was not an idyll. It was a union of two very different people. Sharon embodied traditional values. She dreamed of a home, of children, of quiet family happiness. Polanski, whose childhood had been scorched by war, did not believe in monogamy and did not hide his numerous affairs. This was the second, most painful hook, a desperate attempt to build a traditional family with a man who recognized no rules. "We have a great arrangement. Roman lies to me, and I pretend to believe him," she would admit to friends with bitter irony. She believed her love could change him, that the birth of a child would make him settle down. In late 1968, she became pregnant. According to rumors, Polanski initially urged her to have an abortion, but she was adamant, and he relented. In fact, he was happy. They moved to Los Angeles, to that same house on Cielo Drive, and began preparing for the arrival of their heir. It seemed Sharon's dream was coming true. She was crazy about her husband, and, as her sister Deborah claimed, despite all the rumors, their love was real. She was his muse, his light, his safe harbor in a chaotic world. And for her, he was a genius, a god, the center of her universe. They were two halves of a whole, albeit a very strange one, and it seemed nothing could destroy their happiness. Nothing, except for the absolute, irrational, and unmotivated evil that was already gathering strength in the California desert. While Sharon Tate was basking in the glow of fame and love, in the shadow of the Hollywood Hills, an absolute, irrational evil was brewing in the sun-scorched California desert. This evil had a name: Charles Manson. He was the antithesis of the golden girl Sharon, her dark counterpart, a product of an America that was never written about in glossy magazines. If her life was a fairy tale, his was an endless nightmare. He was born in 1934 to a 16-year-old single mother and never knew his father. His childhood and youth were a kaleidoscope of orphanages, reform schools, and prisons. By the age of 32, he had spent a total of 17 years behind bars. Prison had become his only home, and when he was released again in 1967, he begged the guards to let him stay. He was terrified of freedom because he didn't know how to live in the normal world. It was at this very moment, at the height of the summer of love, that this small, charismatic man with burning eyes and a guitar in his hands stepped onto the streets of San Francisco, which were flooded with naive hippie children. This was the first emotional hook, a devil unleashed to hunt in the Garden of Eden. He was the perfect predator for this environment. Yesterday's high school students, who had run away from their well-off parents in search of freedom and enlightenment, were easy prey for him. He gave them what they craved: a sense of belonging, a purpose in life, and the illusion of rebellion. He told them what they wanted to hear: that their parents were hypocrites, that society was rotten, that love was all they needed. He fed them drugs, had sex with them, and sang them his songs. Thus, the family was born, his personal army of lost souls, ready to do anything for their guru. They settled at the abandoned Spawn Ranch, which had once served as a set for westerns. Here, amidst the dust and filth, Manson built his own ugly world. He was their father, their god, their devil. But this devil had one unattainable, all-consuming dream. He wanted to become a rock star, even bigger than the Beatles. He believed his songs would change the world. In 1968, it seemed that luck was on his side. Through one of his followers, he met Dennis Wilson, the drummer for the Beach Boys, who in turn introduced him to the famous music producer Terry Melcher. This was the second, fateful hook. For Manson, this was the chance of a lifetime. He gave Melcher his recordings, confident that he would be immediately offered a contract. But the miracle never happened. Melcher, a consummate professional, listened to Manson's primitive songs, full of apocalyptic ramblings, and politely turned him down. For Manson, this was not just a rejection. It was a betrayal. It was a humiliation. The entire Hollywood elite, which Melcher represented, had once again rejected him, the unrecognized genius. and his love for the hippie world turned into a fierce, all-consuming hatred. It was at this moment that the insane idea of helter-skelter finally took shape in his fevered mind. He took the name from the Beatles song, interpreting it as a prophecy of a coming race war in which black people would rise up and slaughter the whites. He believed that he, Manson, and his family would wait out this apocalypse in an underground city, only to emerge and lead the new world. But for some reason, the war didn't start. So Manson decided to nudge it along. He decided to show the stupid blacks how to act. He would commit a series of brutal, unmotivated murders in the homes of wealthy white people to pin the blame on the Black Panthers and incite chaos. His first target was the house where the man who betrayed him, Terry Melcher, had lived. The house at 150 Cielo Drive. Manson didn't know that Melcher had long since moved out. He didn't know that Roman Polanski's pregnant wife now lived there. But it didn't matter to him. He was not sending his child killers after a specific person. He was sending them to kill a symbol. The symbol of that brilliant, successful, happy world that had rejected him. The devil from the desert was coming to take his revenge on paradise. Shortly before midnight on August 8, 1969, an old battered Ford pulled up to the house at 150 Cielo Drive. Inside were 4 people, 23-year-old Charles Tex Watson and 3 young women, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian. They were young, attractive, and looked like ordinary hippies, thousands of whom were in California. But they were not flower children. They were angels of death, sent by their guru Charles Manson with one simple, terrifying order: totally destroy everyone in this house as gruesomely as you can. First, Watson climbed a telephone pole and cut the wires, severing the house's connection to the outside world. Then, they climbed over the fence. Just then, car headlights came toward them. It was 18-year-old Stephen Parent, who was visiting his friend, the property's caretaker. He was the random, first, and most innocent victim of the night. Without a word, Watson shot him 4 times and stabbed him. Linda Kasabian, the only member of the group with a driver's license and who did not actively participate in the killings, remained outside to keep watch. The other 3, armed with knives and a revolver, crept toward the house. They silently cut the screen of a window and slipped inside. The scene that greeted them was the picture of a peaceful, serene life. In the living room, Wojciech Frykowski was dozing on the couch. In the bedroom, Sharon Tate was chatting with her friend Abigail Folger, while Jay Sebring sat in a chair reading. This was the first emotional hook, the invasion of absolute irrational evil into a world of absolute harmony. I'm the devil, and I'm here to do the devil's business. With this sentence from Tex Watson, hell began. He kicked the sleeping Frykowski, who, upon waking, asked, "Who the hell are you, and what do you want?" "I'm the devil," Watson repeated. He herded all 4 of them into the living room. The slaughter began. Frykowski and Sebring, attempting to protect the women, resisted, but they were overpowered. Watson shot Sebring and then stabbed him 7 times. Frykowski, who had been bound with a towel, managed to break free and ran onto the lawn, but Watson caught him, shot him several times, and inflicted 51 stab wounds. Abigail Folger also managed to escape the house, but Patricia Krenwinkel caught up with her in the backyard and stabbed her 28 times. Sharon Tate was the last one left. She was alone, face to face with demons. This was the second, most terrifying and heart-wrenching hook. She did not beg for mercy for herself. She pleaded with them to save her unborn child. She offered to let them take her hostage, to wait until she gave birth and then kill her, just to give her son a chance at life. But the killers had no compassion. "Look, bitch, I don't care about you. I don't care that you're about to die. and your baby is going to die soon too." With these words, Susan Atkins and Tex Watson stabbed her 16 times, 5 of which were fatal. As they left their terrible signature on the front door. Using Sharon Tate's blood, Susan Atkins wrote the word pig. It was their message to the world, their ritualistic sign, the beginning of their insane, helter-skelter war. On the morning of August 9th, the bodies were discovered by the housekeeper. The scene that greeted the arriving police officers was so monstrous that even seasoned detectives were in shock. This was not just murder. It was a ritual execution, a bloody mass, a funeral for an entire era. The night of the long knives was over, and Hollywood, and with it all of America, woke up in a completely different, terrifying world. On the morning of August 9th, 1969, Hollywood woke up, but the fairy tale was over. The murders on Cielo Drive were not just another crime story. They were an explosion that shattered the fragile, illusory world of the summer of love to its foundations. All the optimism, all the naive faith in peace, love, and flowers that had been the very air of the 60s evaporated in an instant, replaced by a sticky, primal fear. This was not just the death of 5 people. It was the funeral for an entire era. News of the massacre spread instantly, plunging Los Angeles into a state of shock and panic. But when the names of the victims became known, the pregnant wife of the most fashionable director, a style icon, Hollywood's golden girl, the shock turned to terror. If this could happen to Sharon Tate, the princess in this fairy tale castle, then it could happen to anyone. The invisible wall that separated the world of the rich and famous from the world of violence and death had crumbled. This was the first, most powerful emotional hook, the sudden realization of their own vulnerability. Hollywood stars, accustomed to adoration and worship, suddenly understood that their fame and money could not protect them from irrational, unmotivated evil. Paranoia gripped the city. Frank Sinatra, Steve McQueen, Warren Beatty, everyone who had been a guest at the Polanski Tate home, ran through their contacts in terror, trying to figure out who could possibly want them dead. Steve McQueen, who was supposed to have been at Sharon's for dinner that night but canceled at the last minute, would say for the rest of his life that this decision saved him. The prices of guns and guard dogs skyrocketed. The wealthy residents of Beverly Hills hastily hired bodyguards and installed complex alarm systems in their mansions. Many simply left the city, fleeing the wave of fear. The most terrifying part was the complete lack of motive. The police were at a dead end. It did not look like a robbery. Nothing was missing from the house. It did not look like a murder of jealousy or revenge. The victims were too diverse, and the brutality was excessive. The bloody word pig on the door only added to the mystery and horror. It looked like a ritual killing, a challenge thrown down to the entire establishment. The next night, when the Manson family committed another, equally brutal murder, this time of supermarket chain owner Leno LaBianca and his wife, the panic reached its peak. It became clear that a gang of maniacs was operating in the city. This was the second emotional hook, the death of ideals. The murders on Cielo Drive became the symbolic end of the 60s. The entire hippie ideology, based on love, peace, and nonviolence, was trampled and drowned in blood. It turned out that behind the facade of flower children could hide ruthless killers. It turned out that drugs did not just expand the mind, but also turned people into obedient zombies. It turned out that you could not only meditate to the sound of the Beatles, but also go out and kill. As the famous American writer Joan Didion later wrote, "Many people I know in Los Angeles believe that the 60s ended abruptly on August 9, 1969. The age of innocence was over, and its requiem became Sharon Tate's final cries. Mother, mother." After 2 nights of bloody terror that claimed the lives of 7 people, Los Angeles plunged into an abyss of fear. The police were in a state of panic and confusion. The two crimes, monstrous in their brutality and senselessness, the massacre at the Tate House and the slaughter at the La Bianca house, baffled the city's best detectives. The connection between them was not obvious, and the motive was completely incomprehensible. Initial theories, involving drug trafficking or satanic rituals, fell apart one after another. The hunt had begun, but the hunters did not know who they were hunting. It was a hunt for ghosts. For several months, the case was at a standstill. This was the first emotional hook, the powerlessness of justice in the face of absolute evil. While Hollywood was buying up weapons and barricading itself inside its mansions, the real killers were hiding in plain sight at their dusty Spawn ranch, continuing to live in their strange commune. They were arrested several times, but on completely different minor charges, mostly for car theft. On August 16th, just a week after the murders, a major raid was conducted on the ranch, and Manson and 20 of his followers were arrested. But due to an error in the warrant, they soon had to be released. The killers were literally slipping through the hands of the police. The breakthrough came by chance, or, as some might say, through divine providence. In October, Susan Atkins, one of Manson's most ardent followers and an active participant in both murders, was arrested on suspicion of the murder of Gary Hinman, which had been committed even before the Cielo Drive massacre. While in prison, in a fit of vanity and pride, she boasted to her cellmate that she was the one who had killed the famous Sharon Tate. She described that terrible night in detail, recounting how she had tasted the actress's blood. Her cellmate, a common prostitute, immediately reported this to the authorities. This was the second, decisive hook. The puzzle began to come together. The thread that investigators had been unable to grasp for so long was finally found. The key figure in the investigation became Linda Kasabian, the young woman who had stood as a lookout and did not directly participate in the murders. After the shock of what she had witnessed, she fled the ranch and hid with her parents. Upon learning that the police were on her trail, she voluntarily surrendered to the authorities. In exchange for full immunity from prosecution, she agreed to become the main witness for the prosecution. Her testimony became the battering ram that broke through the wall of silence and mutual protection that surrounded the family. She described everything in minute detail: Manson's insane philosophy, his orders, and that terrible night on Cielo Drive. The trial of Manson and his children, which began in June of 1970, turned into a 9-month circus. Manson acted like a crazed prophet. He carved a cross into his forehead, later turning it into a swastika, screamed, sang, and tried to attack the judge. His female followers on the defendant's bench laughed, whispered, and acted as if the entire proceeding was a fun adventure. Meanwhile, those who remained free held a daily vigil outside the courthouse, giving interviews and threatening witnesses. But despite the chaotic spectacle, thanks to Kasabian's testimony and irrefutable evidence, the jury found them all guilty. Charles Manson, Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, and Patricia Krenwinkel were sentenced to death in the gas chamber. The hunt for the family was over. Evil had been caught and convicted, but the scar it left on the heart of America would never heal. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like, subscribe, and don't forget to click the bell so you don't miss new videos. There are more amazing stories ahead. Take care of yourself and your loved ones.